Demetrius, the attempted conqueror of India. When discussing the Greco-Bactrian invasion of India that may have occurred around the time that the last Maurya, Brihadratha, was assassinated by Pushyamitra Shunga around 185 BC, the events of the invasion are recorded in the Gargi Samhita, an astrological work of uncertain date, one of whose chapters, the Yuga Purana, contains an historical account of the Greek advance to Pataliputra, written, as usual, in the form of prophecy. The passages of the Yuga Purana that Tarn is discussing above record how a people called the Yavanas invaded India as part of what the authors of the Gargi Samhita considered to be the apocalyptic Kali Yuga. According to the Yuga Purana, after these, having invaded Saketa, the Panchalas, and Mathura, the viciously valiant Yavanas, Greeks, will reach Kusumadvaja. Then the thick mud fortification embankment at Pataliputra being reached, all the provinces will be in disorder without doubt.
Why are you reading like Dracula?
No, I'm trying to do an Italian.
No. Okay.
I don't want to do a mock Indian accent.
Okay. I get it now. Okay, sorry.
Ultimately, a great battle will follow with tree-like engines. Furthermore, the Yuga Purana also mentions that the leader of the Yavanas was a man named Dharmamita, whose Tama elders will fearlessly devour the people.
The people?
The people.
No, not the people. Are you from Australia?
Yeah. But the Yuga...
People are playing tennis.
But the Yuga Purana also says that the Yavanas, intoxicated with fighting, will not stay in Madhadesa, the middle country, because there will undoubtedly be a civil war among them, arising in their own country. While the details do vary across the different translations, the approximate sequence of events
remains consistent.
Is consistent with the one that Jayaswal is easy to discover, is easy to discern, to establish. From Jayaswal's translation of these sections, the Yavanas, presumably the Greco-Bactrians, invaded India at a certain point, managed to conquer Saketa, the Panchalas, Mathura, and the former Mauryan capital city, and the former Mauryan capital city of Pataliputra, referred to in the text of this Purana as Puspapura. However, the Yavanas were eventually forced to abandon their conquered Indian territories because of a civil war that occurred in their homeland. However, now that the rough outline of events surrounding the Yavana invasion of Pataliputra has been explained, it is necessary to explain what evidence has survived into the present that allows modern scholars to know with some certainty that the Yavanas are in fact the Greek settlers who lived in Bactrian India. The main piece of evidence surviving into...
So the historical background established, we can now determine, no? Or I will discuss it, or this must be discussed. Actually, yours is fine. Just leave it. I'm just being a nudge.
I changed it to with the historical background established.
Well, I just think it sounds more like step by step. You know what I mean? That's what people love.
The main piece of evidence surviving into present times suggests the Yavanas, sometimes called the Yonas, were the same as the Greco-Bactrians and or the Indo-Greeks, is the 13th major rock edict.
Rock edict?
That the Mauryan...
Like rock stars?
Yeah. That the Mauryan Emperor Ashoka the Great issued during his reign. In this edict, Ashoka briefly mentions the Yonas as being the only country in the world known to him and his people, where these two classes, the Brahmanas and the Shramanas, do not exist.
Okay, I don't get that.
The Brahmanas are like the established...
Yeah, but I don't... Okay.
I didn't explain because Vasunian would already know what those are.
Oh, okay.
The first indication that Yona or Yavana are Sanskrit names for the Greco-Bactrians and or Indo-Greeks is that the name Yona is evocative of both the Greek mythological hero Ion and of Ionia, a highly Hellenized region on the western coast of Turkey. Indeed, A.K. Narayan indicates that this specifically in the first appendix to the Indo-Greeks, where he states that the word Yana, or Yamanu, the name of the Indians, Ionians of Asia Minor who were conquered by Cyrus the Great in 545 BC, was applied to all Greeks without distinction in the Persian language, from which it was presumably transferred to the languages of India. More significantly, however, Raka Edict 13 has a section where Ashoka, who refers to himself in this edict via his fuller, more official title of Devanam Priya Priyadarsan, discusses his conquests. More specifically, the edict states that Ashoka's victories reach even as far as at 600 yojanas to lands ruled by Yona kings such as Antioga, Tulamaya, Antakina, Maka, and Alakya Shudala, or Alaka Sudara in Kharoshthi. According to Eugen Holtz's footnotes on this particular edict, Antioga is the Seleucid king Antiochus II of Syria. Ptolemy is Ptolemy II Philadelphos of Egypt. Antikyne is Antigonus Gonatus of Macedonia. Makkah is Magas of Cyrene. And Alyak Shudala.
Can you say as revealed in the footnotes? Do you think? Makes it sound more like you've found it and you know this thing from your hard work than that you're relying on a footnote.
Yeah. As revealed in blah 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 is either Alexander of Epirus or, more probably, Alexander of Corinth. Although Ashoka's political power certainly did not extend as far as Epirus or Corinth, what this rock edict proves is that the people of ancient India were at least partially aware of the existence of the Greek-speaking peoples and maybe also of the land of Greece. Therefore, when the Yuga Purana refers to the Yavanas, this term probably refers to actual Greek-speaking peoples invading Pataliputra. Although it is clear from Rock Edict 13 that the Yavanas and the Orionas are the Greeks in general, it's fairly safe to say that the Yavanas, referenced in the Yuga Purana, are the Indo-Greeks because they were the closest Greek-speaking society to India geographically. However, knowing this information does not immediately clarify the identity of the Dharmamita, named in the Yuga Purana as the leader of the Yavana siege of Pataliputra. However, Narayan does attempt to date the Yavana invasion to a specific point of Pataliputra to a specific point in the history of the Shunga dynasty, the family who... Oh, wait, I already explained who the Shungas were, base. Narayan says in the introduction to the Indo-Greeks that Pushyamitra's reign appears to have been one of struggle and stress for the new Shunga dynasty, and roughly around the time of Pushyamitra's death, some of the neighboring local powers combined to attack Pataliputra, and the Indo-Greeks seem to have joined them. As for which Greco-Bactrian or Indo-Greek king led the Yavana invasion of India, and whom the Yuga Purana called Dharmamita, the name Dharmamita bears some resemblance to the Greek name Demetrius. Indeed, there is a king attested in the surviving Greco-Bactrian coinage named Demetrius, and sometimes Dimitrios Anikitos, a name that means Demetrius the Unconquerable in Greek. Tarn interprets this epithet as reflecting Demetrius I's desire to emulate Alexander. Tarn also views Demetrius wearing an elephant scalp in some of his coinage as further evidence of him desiring to be king of India. I like when I catch errors like this.
Feels good.
The presence of... The presence of an elephant scalp on his coinage and the possible presence of an indecised version of his name in the Yuga Purana should have italicized that title, are not the only pieces of evidence suggesting that Demetrius had aspirations of conquering India. Demetrius I was the first Greco-Bactrian king known to have issued coins bearing inscriptions in both the Greek alphabet and the Kharoshthi syllabary. This indicates that, unlike his three predecessors, Demetrius sought to ingratiate himself with both his native Bactrian subjects and over the native Indian peoples whom he may have sought to conquer. So far?
So far, so good. I like how you're making an argument. That's new, isn't it?
Yeah. In the first one, I just listed information.
Yeah.
In this one, I'm actually trying to say something.
That's good. As you should.
Indeed, when one examines the coinage that Demetrius I and his successors minted and the monuments that they erected during their... I should probably just say the coinage they minted, because I don't really I just realized I don't...
Talk about monuments.
Except for Menander.
Yeah. Just some coinage.
It becomes...
And you can say focusing just on. And that makes it sound like you made a deliberate choice rather than... I didn't research that. What do you think?
When focusing just on the coinage that Demetrius I and his successors minted, it becomes clear that at least some Indian influences upon their culture began to appear during Demetrius I's reign. For example, there was the use of both Greek and Kharoshthi inscriptions upon the coinage. Kharoshthi sounds like something from Song of Ice and Fire.
It does.
As has already been discussed. Furthermore, one of the symbols that both Alexander the Great and Demetrius I place upon their coinages is an elephant scalp headdress.
I'm picking on elephants and pigs.
The clear purpose of said headdress was to present both Alexander and Demetrius twilight as more like native Indian monarchs rather than invading Greek despots. Finally, not only did Demetrius issue coins bearing an image of either himself or Heracles wearing of himself wearing the elephant scalp headdress. He also minted coins bearing what Krishna Chandra Sagar describes as an elephant's head and conducens on their obverse and reverse sides, respectively. What makes the elephant's head an especially interesting choice regarding Demetrius' probable desire to be seen as a powerful native Indian ruler is that Doris Srinivasan describes the horse and the elephant as animals associated with the Chakravartin, or world ruler. So when Demetrius placed the head of an elephant on some of his coinage, this can be seen as a Greek king deliberately co-opting traditional symbols of Indian kingship in preparation for succeeding where even Alexander was unsuccessful.
Very good. I like that.
However, some scholars have suggested a second, more religiously motivated reason for Demetrius I's decision to lead an military expedition towards Pataliputra. While the name Dharmamitra or Dharmamitra may be merely a rough transliteration of the name Demetrius into Prakrit, it is also a name that is composed of the Sanskrit/Prakrit elements Dharma, a very complex concept that can be translated as variously truth and order or to law, teaching, duty, virtuous behavior, and religion. Meanwhile, the term Mitra is the name of a deva whose name means agreement or contract and was responsible for tribal and social order. Thus, the name Dharmamitra can be translated as meaning contract of religion, but Tarn suggests that the term Dharmamitra means friend of justice in the context of the Yuga Purana is connected with Dharmaraja, a term that Tarn says refers to the ideal king of justice in Indian literature. From the similarities between these two terms, Tarn extrapolates that there were then Indians to whom Demetrius appeared not as a foreign conqueror, but as the king of justice. As for the reason why some native Indians might have regarded Demetrius I as a savior rather than as conqueror, this is possibly related to the actions that Pushyamitra Shunga undertook after he became ruler of the former... You okay?
Yep, I'm fine, just ignore it. It's just the cold going away.
Mauryan Empire. While the Mauryans were famous for their religious tolerance, Pushyamitra Shunga was less accepting of Buddhism. According to surviving Buddhist chronicles, Pushyamitra persecuted Buddhists and gave increasing patronage to Vedic Brahmins. For example, R.K. Pruthi says that Pushyamitra tried unsuccessfully to destroy the famous Kukutarama monastery in Pataliputra. Pushyamitra is also said to have offered a reward of 100 dinars for the head of every Buddhist monk. Pushyamitra also seems to have revived the traditional Ashvamedha horse sacrifice rituals, and did his best to revive the Brahmanical religion. Because of this alleged persecution, it's possible that Demetrius' expedition towards Pataliputra towards an attempted conquest of Pataliputra may have been received by Buddhists enduring Shunga and Brahmanic repression as the king of justice who would overthrow Pushyamitra and free them from oppression. As Tarn indicates in the 4th chapter of the Greeks in Bactrian India, entitled Demetrius and the Invasion of India.
Sounds like a kid's book.
Tarn indicate the Yuga Purana was originally written in Sanskrit, the sacred language of the Brahmanic religion. Therefore, while the use of the term Dharmamita might have been received from what Tarn describes as preserved traces of a very different view, probably from the original Prakrit Chronicle, a document on which the sections of our Yuga Purana dealing with the Yavadas are based, the text that has survived into present times is heavily biased against the Yavadas. Not only are they described as burning and ravaging the countryside, but it is also interesting to note that one of the signs of the apocalypse that they bring is what Tarn describes as the effect the effect of the Greek conquest was to turn the world upside down, confound the castes, and make Jack as good as his master. This indicates that the invading Greeks were not concerned with recognizing or maintaining the established social systems and power structures of the land that they were invading, which would explain why called a run-on sentence.
Good. Oh.
Excuse me. This would explain why groups that were oppressed and or marginalized within Indian society, such as Buddhists or Shudras, might have seen Demetrius' Greeks as saviors. However, although this might seem noble to modern readers, what it indicates is that Demetrius I was unconcerned with how native Indians would perceive his actions. Instead of trying to accept and acknowledge India's unique culture and traditions, Demetrius undermined traditional Indian society without creating anything to replace it. Ironically, in his attempt to succeed where Alexander the Great failed, Demetrius I probably failed. I accidentally wrote probably a fail. Probably failed mostly because he also used military force and the ravaging of towns to subjugate India to his will, rather than using diplomacy or trade to accomplish his goals.
The same violent means. Violent deeds have violent ends.
There is also not much substantial evidence indicating that Demetrius I was actually motivated by some desire to protect Buddhists from Brahmanic persecution. As Tarn discusses... let me clear out my voice. No! no Hellenistic king would ever have supported one religion against another, but one of the cardinal tenets of Greeks in the Hellenistic centuries was that no man's religion was anyone's business but his own. While Tarn acknowledges that Antiochus Epiphanes attempts to destroy the Jewish religion in the 2nd century BCE constitute a fairly substantial exception to this idea, he still views Antiochus IV Epiphanes as an exception, and apart from this once Seleucid king, the rule never seems to have been broken. Furthermore, according to Tarn, it seems certain enough now that we never find Buddhist symbolism on the coins of the Greek kings, or indeed any Indian religious symbolism except that relating to the god or gods of some particular city on the coins minted in that city.
Unreal City.
And so, seeing the question of Demetrius' potential Buddhist motives from this perspective, Tarn argues that the word sota on the coins of Apollodotus and Menander may really imply a manifesto issued by Demetrius to the people of the lines of the famous proclamation of Antigonus I that all Greeks should be free, a proclamation which for years was a main motive power of Hellenistic history. Thus, in Tarn's opinion, the idea that Demetrius of Bactria as a deliberate champion of Buddhism is inconsistent with actual Hellenistic culture, and there is no substantial evidence to indicate that Demetrius I sought to ignore that tradition. Thus, it seems most likely that Demetrius I's invasion of India was less motivated by a desire to liberate oppressed people in India from the control of the Shunga Empire, and was rather more motivated by the king desiring to become a greater king than his distant predecessor. Conqueror than his distant predecessor, Alexander the Great. However, it does seem to the... See what I'm doing? I'm tearing apart this idea that he was some kind of...
Is this all new?
Yes, I'm the first guy to really say,
Good.
No, he was not.
Excellent, keep going.
By Buddhist heroism.
Good.
However, it does seem that for at least some time, Demetrius I was successful in his conquests. Demetrius placed his eldest son, Euthydemus I, as king to look after Bactria Sogdiana in his absence, and then took to India with him his second son, Demetrius II, had also his general Menander. Demetrius then managed to conquer the kingdom of Gandhara in what is now Pakistan and establish his advanced base in the city of Taxila. In a decision that would have substantial consequences for the future of the Greeks who lived in India and Bactria, Demetrius I left his younger son, Demetrius II, to govern the country between the Hindu Kush and the Indus in order to secure and improve the communications with Bactria. Then Demetrius embarked upon the famous expedition into India, partially described in the Yuga Purana. According to Sailendra Nath Sen, in distances traversed and territory acquired, the Bactrian Greeks surpassed both the Persian and the Macedonian. And Macedonians. Furthermore, according to Tarn, in his account of Demetrius' expedition into India, Menander's advance to the southeast is attested for both from the Greek and the Indian side, suggesting that either Demetrius left more of a substantial impact on the Indian subcontinent by his invasion than Alexander managed to accomplish, or that the Greco-Bactrian armies, unlike their Macedonian antecedents, succeeded in invading in regions of India where literacy was widespread enough for sources to have been both written and preserved much longer than in the Punjab or in Gandhara. It is certainly true that there are indeed references to the Yavanas in native Indian sources that that support the idea of Demetrius' invasion of India being much more remembered in native Indian records than Alexander's was. For example, there is a character in the Mahabharata called Satyaki or Yuyudhana Dahana who fights against a group of Yavanas in the 7th book of the epic. In this section, the Yavanas are described as many in number and endued with lightness of hands, a description that suggests both that the large size of Demetrius' army was well remembered during the time that the Mahabharata was transcribed into writing, and that the Indo-Greeks became famous for being excellent archers in later Indian mythology. Furthermore, the specific context of this passage is that Satyaki kills many Yavanas during the battle, along with thousands of Kambojas and Shakas and Barbaras, alongside other people called the Malekas. Malekas. This could be seen as vicarious revenge on the Greco-Bactrian invasion, with a traditional Indian folk hero murdering the invaders in a glorious battle.
So it's fictionalized.
Yeah. Furthermore, Surjit Mansingh says that the noted Sanskrit grammarian Patanjali records that the Indo-Greeks raided as far east as Pataliputra before succumbing to internal feuds and the greater power of the Kushans. The last part of the sentence, quoted from Mansingh's Historical Dictionary of India, also indicates something else very significant about Demetrius' invasion. Even though he conquered more territory and crossed a greater amount of land than Alexander had ever managed to accomplish, Demetrius' army ultimately retrieved from India and returned to back to Bactria. As discussed earlier, the Yuga Purana mentions that the reason the Yavanas finally retrieved from India is because there will be the most fierce and terrible land war rising in the Yavanas' own circle, realm, or land. Tard concurs with the idea that Demetrius prematurely abandoned his invasion of India because Demetrius' coins struck in India are rare and all seem to have been struck by Demetrius II west of the Indus. Dinesh Sarkar is certain that this section of the Purana references the internecine struggle among the Indo-Bactrian Greeks between the partisans of Demetrius and those of Eucratides. The Eucratides, who Sarkar describes as Demetrius' opponent, might have been either a satrap of the northern provinces of the Greco-Bactrian kingdom or was a soldier of fortune. Justin, in the Epitome Historiarum Philippicarum, records that closely around this time, as with Mithridates among the Parthians, so with Eucratides among the Bactrians, both these great men began their reigns simultaneously. Furthermore, Justin also says that Eucratides fought many wars with great nobility, including a conflict with Demetrius, king of the Indians. However, the most interesting factor to note about I overuse however sometimes.
Yeah, you can say, on the contrary, in opposition, nevertheless. And yet, or yet.
Actually, it was just the beginning of a new section. There's no contrast with it.
Oh, my mistake.
Demetrius, king of the Indians. Even though it is easy to assume that Demetrius, king of the Indians, in Latin it's Dimitri Regus Indorum, is the same king as Demetrius I of the Greco-Bactrian kingdom. This is not as likely as it may initially seem to be. Justin synchronizes the beginning of Eucratides' reign in Bactria with a man named Mithridates becoming king of Parthia. Excuse me. According to Narayan, however, the synchronism established by Justin dates the rise of Eucratides circa 171 BC, over a decade after civil strife forced Demetrius to return to the Greco-Bactrian kingdom. Therefore, Eucratides I cannot have been the rebel king who forced Demetrius I to abandon his campaign. However, Narayan does not name the person whom he thinks was the actual rival.
Do you need however there? I think you're already be stronger if you just said he doesn't name him.
Narayan does not name the person whom he thinks was the actual rival of Demetrius I's rebellion circa 182 BC to 180 BCA led to the premature...
Better or worse?
Better.
Okay.
Led to the premature termination of Demetrius I's campaign in India. Meanwhile, Tarn also rejects the idea that Eucratides fought against Demetrius I such Demetrius and...
Meanwhile, in addition. Don't you think? Sounds more formal?
In addition, Tarn also rejects the idea that Eucratides I fought against Demetrius I slash Demetrius Adikatos. Rather, Tarn...
In addition. Tarn also will suffice. You can take out in addition. It's up to you. I mean...
Tarn also rejects this idea. Rather, Tarn believes that Demetrius' return to Bactria was simply him returning to his homeland in order to reorganize the satrapies of his main kingdom. For example, Demetrius appoints his third son, Pantaleon...
Not Pantaleon.
To be sub-king of Seistan and Arachosia. And then I explain what those were. Seistan was in what's now southeastern Iran. Arachosia is what's now southern Afghanistan. In place of Apollodotus, whose hands were full in India.
Don McGann leaving his job. Yep. I'm listening. I am listening.
Among all the territories that Demetrius had managed to conquer India, the only region that remained under Greco-Bactrian rule was the Paral-Pamasade, a valley of the Hindu Kush in what is now Pakistan. However, despite Demetrius I's reorganization of the Greco-Bactrian
You don't need however and despite. Do you?
I'll just
Is it redundant, right?
Yeah. Despite Demetrius I's reorganization of the Greco-Bactrian satrapies, his dynasty was overthrown in Bactria a mere decade after his attempted invasion of India. Although, as will be discussed later in this dissertation, some of Demetrius I's descendants survived in the Indo-Greek kingdom that Demetrius I founded in Taxila. Thus, Demetrius I Adikatos' attempted invasion of India can be seen as an example of what the Greeks called hubris, a type of overwhelming arrogance that drives great men to destruction. In conclusion, Demetrius' invasion of India seems to have been an ambitious,
right, go ahead,
but ultimately futile endeavor. Demetrius sought to be greater than Alexander by conquering the one region of the world that Alexander failed to subdue during his wars of conquest.
And as a result, he accomplished nothing.
Considering the evidence found in the Yuga Purana, it seems that Demetrius may have initially been successful, even managing to conquer as far as the former Mauryan capital city of Pataliputra, the far eastern part of India.
But this was an illusion.
However, the surviving evidence also indicates that despite the great distances that Demetrius I traversed in the many provinces that he conquered, the Greco-Bactrian king allowed his own realm to suffer from civil unrest while he was busy leading his invasion of India. As a result of the instability in Bactria, Demetrius I was forced to end his Indian campaign, or at least his leadership of the Greek army during that particular expedition, and returned to Bactria in order to restore order to the realm. Furthermore, in his
here. Sorry. Come on. Go ahead, Jimmy. Just ignore her. She's doing the P-E-S-T.
Furthermore, in his desire for glorious conquest of India, Demetrius failed to engage in trade or diplomacy with native Indian cultures. As a result, the Shunga Empire was able to reassert control over Pataliputra not long after Demetrius I's retreat from the Indian subcontinent, negating most of what Demetrius I accomplished in this campaign.
This is what you said Alexander did wrong too, right?
Yes.
Okay, so should you say
the
mimicking Alexander's mistakes, or similar to Alexander, or the pattern again, because you're kind of making a conclusion there that's quite interesting, isn't it? That the failure to establish diplomatic ties is what's causing each of these to fail to sustain their control, right?
Similar to Alexander's
he didn't also turn it over to another person to rule, did he?
Nope.
Okay, so, yep.
The reason why Pushyamitra was easily able to do this is because Demetrius I's campaign in India seems to have mostly relied on burning and besieging cities rather than engaging in trade and diplomacy. Thus, much like his predecessor Alexander the Great. Oh, look, did you hear that?
What?
Much like his predecessor.
I like that. Is that good?
Yep.
Does that work for you?
Yep. Demetrius I
It was also an egoist, yeah?
It was already...
Go.
Demetrius I was defeated because his pride and ambition made him unable to realize what he needed to do in order to maintain control over the territories that he sought to administer. However...
Ego obscured the proper course for administration that would sustain his empire. I agree.
Yep.
I have to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back, okay? Is that right? I don't have a choice. I have to go. Look out, Opie. I will be back in a momento.
However, there was a later Indo-Greek monarch who chose to eschew war between Greek and Indian cultures and instead cultivated more peaceful relationships between these two very different regions of the world. This man was a former general in Demetrius's armies, the first armies named Menander.
I love your story. I don't admire anyone. What's the time? The great hero you want. The great hero you want. It's a guy that guy gets beaten to death with a fly stick. What? Toy, you're a fly. This boy. Eyeball dog.
So, due to there's
Yes.
However, there was a later Indo-Greek monarch who chose to eschew war between Greek and Indian cultures, and instead cultivate more peaceful relationships between these two very different regions of the world. This man was a former general in Demetrius the First armies named Menander.
Meander?
Menander. Do you want me to read that last sentence again?
Yeah.
However, there was a later Indo-Greek monarch who chose to eschew war between Greek and Indian cultures, and instead cultivate more peaceful relationships between these two very different regions of the world. This man was a former general in Demetrius the First armies named Menander.
Okay.